I'm standing in my living room watching my daughter accuse me of manipulating her dead father. And I can't believe this is happening. Rebecca's face is twisted into something I don't recognize. Cold, calculating, furious. My son Martin is red-faced and shaking, his fists clenched like he wants to hit something. Kyle, my youngest, has stopped crying. Just stopped. Like someone flipped a switch. The tears that were streaming down his face 2 seconds ago are gone. And now he's just staring at me with this look I've never seen before. "This is bullshit," Martin says again, louder this time. "Dad wouldn't cut us out like this. He wouldn't leave everything to you, and nothing to us." Tom, the lawyer, is trying to explain that they're not cut out, that they'll inherit everything after I die. But nobody's listening. Rebecca is on her phone already, probably texting her husband or maybe a lawyer. Kyle is looking at the floor, but I can see his jaw working, grinding his teeth the way he does when he's planning something. My husband died 6 days ago. 6 days. We buried him yesterday. This morning I woke up thinking the worst was over, thinking we'd grieve together as a family, thinking my children would help me figure out how to live without the man I spent 39 years loving. Instead, I'm watching them calculate how much money they just lost. "When did Dad write this will?" Rebecca asks Tom, her voice sharp. 3 weeks ago. He came to my office specifically to update it. 3 weeks. She turns to me. "What happened 3 weeks ago, Mother? What did you say to him? What did you do?" I have no idea what she's talking about. 3 weeks ago was a normal week. Howard went to work at the hardware store. I tended my garden. We had dinner together. We watched TV. We went to bed. Nothing happened. Nothing changed. Or at least I didn't think anything had changed. But apparently, Howard saw something I didn't see. Apparently, he knew this was coming. I reach into my cardigan pocket and pull out the letter I found in his nightstand drawer 3 days ago. The letter I've been carrying around like a secret, like a bomb, not knowing what to do with it. The letter that says, "Be careful with our children. Trust your instincts more than their words." Your father knew, I say, and my voice sounds strange, distant. He knew you'd do this. The room goes silent. Not peaceful silent. Dangerous silent. "What is that?" Rebecca asks. "A letter from Howard. He left it for me." Martin steps forward. "Let me see it." "No. Mom, if Dad wrote something about us, we have a right to see it." "You have a right?" I'm surprised by the anger in my own voice. "You have a right to read a private letter your father left for his wife? You have a right to stand in my house, the house he left to me, and demand things from me? Is that what you think?" Kyle finally speaks. His voice is quiet, hurt, the sad little boy voice he's been using since he was 5 years old, and learned it got him what he wanted. "Mom, we're not trying to hurt you. We're just confused. We thought we'd be taken care of. We thought Dad wanted us to be secure." "You are secure," Tom says, his patience clearly wearing thin. "You'll inherit everything when your mother passes. That's incredibly generous. Most parents don't leave their children anything." "Most parents trust their children," Rebecca shoots back. "Most parents don't think their kids are going to steal from them, or whatever Dad apparently thought." "He didn't think you'd steal," I say. "He thought you'd pressure me. He thought you'd make me feel guilty for having what he worked his whole life to build. He thought you'd forget I'm a person with my own needs, and just see me as an obstacle between you and money." "That's not fair," Kyle says. "Isn't it?" I look at each of them. Really look at them. Rebecca in her expensive suit that cost more than Howard and I spent on groceries in a month. Martin in his real estate broker outfit, always selling something, always working an angle. Kyle in his borrowed blazer playing the struggling artist even though his restaurant job pays well, and his apartment is nicer than the first house Howard and I bought. When was the last time any of you visited without asking for something? When was the last time you called just to see how we were doing? Not because you needed money or advice or help with something. Jesus Christ. Martin explodes. Are you serious right now? Dad just died and you're making this about us not visiting enough. Your father made this about that. I'm just reading his letter. Rebecca's eyes narrow. I want to contest the will. This isn't right. Dad obviously wasn't thinking clearly. He was perfectly clear, Tom says. I can assure you there are no grounds for contestation. Howard was healthy, sound of mind, and very deliberate in his decisions. We'll see what our lawyer says, Rebecca snaps. And there it is. Our lawyer. Not a lawyer. Our lawyer. They've already discussed this. They've already planned this. Maybe they planned it before Howard even died. Maybe they've been waiting for this moment, preparing for it, making sure they'd get what they believed was theirs. I think about the phone calls over the last few months. Rebecca asking about the hardware store's revenue. Martin wondering if we'd thought about downsizing the house. Kyle sending expensive gifts and then casually mentioning his credit card debt. I thought they were just being thoughtful, just checking in, just being my children. But Howard saw something else. He saw them circling, waiting, preparing. Get out, I say. Nobody moves. Get out of my house. Your house. Rebecca laughs, and it's an ugly sound. It's Dad's house. It's our inheritance. You're just the person living in it temporarily. Something breaks inside me. Not breaks. Shatters. 39 years of marriage. 41 years of knowing this man. Decades of building a life and raising children and sacrificing and loving. And this is what it comes down to. My daughter looking at me like I'm a squatter in my own home. My sons treating their father's death like a business transaction gone wrong. This is my house because your father left it to me. The hardware store is mine. The lake house is mine. The bank accounts are mine. Everything is mine until I die, and then it's yours. That's what your father wanted. That's what his will says. And if you don't like it, if you want to hire lawyers and fight me and try to prove I'm some kind of manipulative witch who brainwashed your father, go ahead. But you're going to do it from somewhere else because I want you out of my house right now. Martin grabs his coat. His face is purple with rage. You're going to regret this. You're going to lose us over money. I'm not the one choosing money over family, I say quietly. You are. You're the ones who couldn't even wait a week after your father's funeral before demanding to know what you're getting. You're the ones who looked at his will and got angry that his widow inherited his estate. You're the ones proving him right. Rebecca's already at the door. She doesn't say goodbye. She doesn't look back. Martin follows, slamming the door so hard the pictures on the wall shake. Kyle hesitates, tears streaming down his face again. Real tears this time, maybe. Or just another performance. Mom, I'm sorry, he whispers. Are you? He doesn't answer. He just leaves. Tom and I sit in the sudden silence. Through the window, I can see my children getting into their cars. Rebecca's black Mercedes, Martin's truck, Kyle's rental. They're probably calling each other already, planning their next move, figuring out how to fight me. I look down at Howard's letter, his handwriting blurred through my tears. Be careful with our children. He tried to warn me. He tried to prepare me. But nothing could have prepared me for this. Nothing could have prepared me for watching my children transform into strangers the second they realized they weren't getting what they wanted. They're going to come after me, aren't they? I ask Tom. Probably, he says. But Diane, they won't win. The will is ironclad. Howard made sure of that. I nod, but I'm not thinking about the will anymore. I'm thinking about Rebecca at 5 years old, bringing me dandelions from the yard. Martin at 8, holding my hand during a thunderstorm. Kyle as a baby, falling asleep on my chest. I'm thinking about all the years I spent loving them, raising them, sacrificing for them, believing I was building something good. I'm thinking about how Howard saw what was coming and tried to protect me, and how I didn't believe him until it was too late. I'm thinking about how I'm 65 years old, And I just lost my husband and my children in the same week. And I'm thinking about what comes next, because apparently I'm going to have to fight my own children for the right to keep what my husband left me. Apparently, I'm going to have to prove I didn't manipulate or coerce or brainwash the man I loved for 4 decades. Apparently, I'm going to have to choose between being a mother and protecting myself. Howard's letter says to trust my instincts. Right now, my instincts are screaming that everything I thought I knew about my family was a lie. My instincts are telling me that my children stopped being my children a long time ago, and I was just too blind to see it. My instincts are telling me that the real nightmare isn't losing Howard. It's discovering what he already knew, that I've been alone in this family for longer than I realized, and now I have to figure out how to survive that. I've always believed that you can tell the kind of day you're going to have by the quality of the morning light. In Asheville, North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Mountains cradle the city like protective hands, the light has a particular texture, soft and golden in spring, crisp and clear in fall, heavy and wet during summer storms. On the morning Howard died, the light was thin and gray, filtering through our bedroom curtains like something diluted, something wrong. I woke up at 6:30, same as always. Howard's side of the bed was already empty, the sheets cool to the touch. I could hear him downstairs, the familiar sounds of our morning routine, the coffee maker gurgling, the clink of a spoon against ceramic, the back door opening and closing as he checked the weather. 39 years of marriage had made us into a kind of organism, moving in predictable patterns, comfortable in our rhythms. I didn't know, pulling on my robe and sliding my feet into slippers, that I had less than 2 hours left with him. Our house sits on a quiet street in the Montford neighborhood, one of those areas where the homes still have front porches and people actually sit on them. Howard and I bought the place in 1986, back when Asheville was still sleepy and eccentric, before the breweries and the tourists and the young people with their expensive coffee shops. It's a craftsman-style house, pale yellow with white trim, a wraparound porch that Howard built himself the summer after we moved in. 3 bedrooms upstairs, hardwood floors throughout. A kitchen I've repainted 4 times trying to get the color just right. Our children grew up here. Our life happened here. I found Howard in the kitchen, standing at the counter with his reading glasses perched on his nose, frowning at the newspaper. He was wearing his usual uniform, flannel shirt, jeans, work boots, already laced up even though the hardware store didn't open until 9. His hair had gone completely white in the last 5 years, but he still had all of it, thick and unruly, refusing to lay flat no matter how much he combed it. He looked up when I came in, and his face softened into the smile I'd been seeing since I was 26 years old. "Coffee's ready," he said. "I made it strong. Thought we'd need it today." "Why's that?" I poured myself a cup, added cream, leaned against the counter beside him. He folded the newspaper, set it aside. "Tom called last night after you went to bed. He finished the updates to the will. Wants us to come sign everything next week." I nodded. We'd been meaning to update our will for years. Nothing dramatic, just adjustments for inflation, clarifications about the business, making sure everything was in order. We weren't old, not really, but 68 and 65 felt like reasonable ages to have our affairs settled, just in case. "Rebecca called too," Howard added, his tone careful. "Wants to know if we're still planning to come to Charlotte for Thanksgiving." "Of course we are. Why wouldn't we?" Howard shrugged, but there was something in his eyes, a shadow I'd been seeing more frequently in recent months. "No reason. Just checking." I sipped my coffee, watching him over the rim of the mug. My husband was not a complicated man in most ways. He believed in hard work, fair prices, and keeping your word. He'd run Cartwright Hardware for 30 years, turning it from a failing shop he'd inherited from his father into something solid and respectable. He knew every customer by name, could tell you which screws worked best for which projects, would stay open late if someone needed something for an emergency repair. But lately there'd been a distance in him, a preoccupation I couldn't quite name. "Howard," I said carefully, "is something wrong? With the kids, I mean. You've been, I don't know, worried?" He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. "Nothing wrong, just tired maybe. Getting old makes you think about things differently. We're not old." "You're not old," he corrected, smiling. "You still look like the girl who yelled at me for tracking mud into the library." I laughed despite myself remembering. We'd met at the public library on Haywood Street. I was a volunteer there, restocking books on a rainy Saturday afternoon. He'd come in soaking wet, leaving footprints across the carpet, looking for a book about building furniture. I'd scolded him about the mess. He'd apologized and asked me to dinner. 6 months later, we were married in a small ceremony at the courthouse. Too impatient and too in love to wait for anything bigger. "That was 40 years ago," I said. 41 in December. He reached over, tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His hand lingered on my cheek. "Best decision I ever made, tracking mud into that library." I covered his hand with mine, held it there. These moments of tenderness had always been our language. Quiet, simple, real. We weren't people who gave grand speeches or made dramatic gestures. We were the couple who held hands in the car, who still kissed goodnight, who said, "I love you," like it was a fact rather than a declaration. "I need to fix that porch railing today," Howard said, pulling away gently. "Been putting it off too long. Diane, if I don't get it done soon, someone's going to lean on it and end up in the hydrangeas. Want me to help?" "Nah, it's a one-person job. You've got your garden club meeting this morning, don't you?" I did. Every other Tuesday, a group of us met at Mary Beth Thornton's house to drink coffee too sweet and gossip about plants. It was the kind of routine that made life feel stable, predictable. I liked predictable. I'd always liked predictable. Howard finished his coffee, kissed my forehead, and headed outside. Through the kitchen window, I watched him walk across the backyard, past my vegetable garden, still producing tomatoes despite the October chill, to the small shed where he kept his tools. He moved with purpose, with the confidence of a man who knew how to fix things. I didn't know I was watching him for the last time. I went upstairs to shower and dress. The garden club wasn't until 10, but I liked having time to myself in the mornings, time to think and prepare. Our bedroom window overlooked the street, and as I brushed my hair, I could see Mrs. Patterson from across the way, walking her ancient beagle. Mr. Henderson heading to his car in his postal uniform. The young couple at the corner house. I still thought of them as young, even though they had 2 kids in elementary school, loading strollers into their minivan. Asheville had changed so much in the decades we'd lived here, but this street, this little pocket of Montford, still felt like the place we'd fallen in love with. Tree-lined and quiet, where people waved when they passed each other, where you could leave your porch light on and feel safe. Howard and I had built our life here deliberately, carefully, trying to create something stable for our children, something better than what either of us had growing up. I came from a family that moved every few years, my father chasing job opportunities that never quite panned out, my mother growing quieter and more withdrawn with each relocation. By the time I graduated high school, I'd attended 5 different schools. I promised myself my children would have roots, would have consistency, would know what home meant. Howard had grown up in Asheville, but in a house filled with tension. A father who drank, a mother who worked 2 jobs, older brothers who escaped as soon as they could. He'd inherited the hardware store only because no one else wanted it, and he'd poured everything into making it succeed because he needed to prove something. Maybe to his dead father, maybe to himself. We'd given our children everything we hadn't had. Stability, a house that was always theirs, Parents who showed up to recitals and games and parent-teacher conferences. College funds, support, love. I thought we'd done it right. At 9:45, I grabbed my purse and headed downstairs, planning to tell Howard I was leaving. The front door was still open. He must have come back inside for something. I called his name. No answer. I walked through the living room, past the photos on the mantel. Our wedding day, the kids at various ages, a picture of Howard and me at the lake house last summer, and into the kitchen. The back door was open too, swinging slightly in the breeze. I don't know what made me move faster. Some instinct, some animal awareness that something was wrong. I walked quickly through the door, across the porch, down the 3 steps to the backyard. And there he was. Howard was lying on his back beside the porch railing, his toolbox spilled beside him, screws scattered across the grass like seeds. His eyes were open, staring at the sky. His face was gray. I heard myself make a sound. Not a scream. Something worse. Something raw and primitive. I dropped to my knees beside him, grabbed his shoulders, shook him. "Howard! Howard!" His body was warm but wrong, empty, already becoming something other than the man I knew. What happened next is blurred in my memory. Calling 911. My hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. Trying to perform CPR the way they instructed over the phone. Pressing on his chest, feeling his ribs shift under my palms. Knowing it was useless, knowing he was already gone, but unable to stop trying. The ambulance arriving, the paramedics gentle but firm as they moved me aside, their faces telling me everything before they spoke the words. "I'm sorry, ma'am. He's gone. It looks like a massive heart attack. It would have been very fast. Fast. As if that was supposed to be a comfort. As if there was a good way to lose someone." The next few hours passed in a fog of questions and phone calls and people appearing in my house without me remembering letting them in. Mrs. Patterson brought tea I didn't drink. Reverend Matthews from the Methodist church we attended occasionally came to sit with me, his presence well-meaning but useless. I called our children. Rebecca first because she was the oldest, because she'd always been the responsible one. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice distracted, probably in the middle of a meeting. "Mom, everything okay? I'm kind of busy. Your father's dead." The words came out flat, factual. I heard her intake of breath, the silence that followed. "What? What do you mean? What happened?" I told her. "Heart attack. This morning. Gone." She asked questions I couldn't answer. Had he been feeling ill? Had he complained of pain? Why didn't we see this coming? As if death was something you could prevent with enough planning. "I'll drive up tonight," she said finally. "I need to. God, I need to tell David and the kids. Mom, are you okay? Is anyone there with you?" "I'm fine," I lied. "Just come when you can." Martin was next. He answered on the second ring, his voice bright and energetic. "Hey, Mom, what's up?" I told him. He went quiet, then made a choked sound that might have been a sob. No, that's not. He was fine. We just talked last week. He was fine. I know. I'm coming. I'm getting in the car right now. I'll be there in 3 hours. Mom, don't. Just don't do anything. Don't make any decisions. I'll handle everything. Kyle was the hardest to call. My youngest, my sensitive one. The child who'd always needed more reassurance, more attention, more of everything. He'd struggled through his 20s, dropping out of college, moving from job to job. A brief stint in rehab for prescription pills he'd gotten too dependent on after a car accident. He'd only recently seemed to find his footing, managing that restaurant in Greensboro, calling more regularly, seeming more stable. His phone went to voicemail. I left a message trying to keep my voice steady. "Kyle, it's Mom. Please call me as soon as you get this. It's about your father. It's urgent." He called back 20 minutes later, breathless. "Mom, what's wrong? Is Dad okay?" "No, sweetheart. He's not. He had a heart attack this morning. He died The sound he made broke something in me. Kyle had always been close to Howard, had worshipped his father in that way youngest sons sometimes do. Howard had been patient with him in ways I couldn't always manage, had given him chance after chance, had believed in him when the rest of us had started to doubt. "I'm coming home," Kyle said, crying openly now. "I'm coming right now. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, honey. It's no one's fault." But even as I said it, I wondered if that was true. Could we have prevented this? Should we have seen the signs? Had Howard known something was wrong and kept it to himself, the way he kept so many things to himself? The house filled with people as the day wore on, neighbors bringing casseroles and sympathy, Howard's employees from the hardware store standing awkwardly in the living room, not knowing what to say, Tom Pritchard, the lawyer, arriving with paperwork and condolences. Everyone meant well. Everyone was useless. My children arrived in stages. Martin first, bursting through the door in the early afternoon, his face red and wet with tears, pulling me into a hug so tight I couldn't breathe. Rebecca later, more controlled, her grief showing only in the tightness around her eyes and the way her hands kept clenching and unclenching. Kyle last, as the sun was setting, looking younger than his 33 years, collapsing into my arms like he was a child again. We sat together that night, the four of us, in the living room that suddenly felt too big and too empty. We cried. We told stories about Howard. Funny ones, mostly, because none of us could handle the sad ones yet. Martin talked about the time Howard taught him to drive, and they'd accidentally driven into a mailbox. Rebecca remembered Howard showing up at her college graduation with flowers, even though she'd told him not to make a fuss. Kyle recalled fishing trips to the lake house, just him and his dad, sitting in silence on the dock for hours. They were good memories. They felt real. My children seemed genuinely devastated. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But there was something in the way Rebecca kept checking her phone, the way Martin asked pointed questions about Howard's affairs and whether everything was in order, the way Kyle's grief seemed almost performative, a little too demonstrative, a little too aware of its own drama. I pushed the thoughts away. I was being paranoid. I was looking for problems where there were none. They were mourning their father. Of course, they were emotional and distracted and not behaving perfectly. Grief didn't follow rules. That night, after my children had gone to their old bedrooms, Rebecca in her childhood room with the pale blue walls, Martin in the guest room, Kyle on the couch because he said he couldn't sleep in his old room without thinking about high school and all the mistakes he'd made. I went upstairs alone. Our bedroom felt cavernous without Howard in it. His reading glasses sat on the nightstand beside a book about woodworking he'd been reading for months. His slippers were still by the bed. His smell, sawdust and coffee and that particular soap he used, still lingered in the air. I sat on the edge of the bed, trying to understand how a person could be here in the morning and gone by noon, how 39 years could end between one breath and the next. I reached for Howard's nightstand drawer, looking for nothing in particular, just wanting to touch things he'd touched, to feel close to him somehow. That's when I found the letter. It was in a sealed envelope, my name written on the front in Howard's careful handwriting. The envelope was tucked beneath his reading glasses, and that woodworking book, hidden but not hidden, like he'd wanted me to find it, but only when I was ready. My hands shook as I opened it. The letter inside was short, written on a piece of notebook paper, dated 3 days ago. Dear Diane, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry. I wish I could have had more time with you. I wish I could have said goodbye properly. You've been the best part of my life, the only part that ever made sense. I need you to be careful with our children. I know that sounds strange. I know you'll want to dismiss this, but trust your instincts more than their words. Watch what they do, not what they say. I've been watching for a while now. and I see things I wish I didn't see. I've made arrangements. Tom has the will. Everything goes to you. The house, the business, the lake house, all of it. The kids will inherit after you're gone. I know this will cause problems. I'm sorry for that. But I trust you to handle things the right way. I trust you to know when to be generous and when to protect yourself. I love you, Diane. I have loved you since that rainy day in the library. Take care of yourself and be careful. H. I read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Be careful with our children. What did that mean? Howard had always been protective of them, had always been the one to give them the benefit of the doubt when I had concerns. Why this warning now? What had he seen that I hadn't? I looked at the date again. 3 days ago. The day after Rebecca had called asking about Thanksgiving. The day after Martin had stopped by the hardware store, just to check in. The week after Kyle had sent me that expensive bottle of wine with a note saying he was thinking of us. Had something happened? Had they said something to Howard? Done something that made him suspicious? Or was this just the paranoia of a man sensing his own mortality, seeing threats where there were none? I folded the letter carefully, put it back in the envelope, and tucked it into my own nightstand drawer. I didn't know what to do with it. Didn't know what it meant. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. Downstairs, I could hear my children moving around, footsteps on the hardwood, the refrigerator opening and closing, murmured voices I couldn't quite make out. They sounded like people who belonged here. They sounded like my babies, grown up, but still mine. I wanted to go down there, to believe in them, to trust that Howard's letter was just an overreaction, a moment of fear from a man who didn't know he was about to die. But I stayed in the bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, holding that letter like a secret, like a warning, like something I wasn't ready to understand yet. Outside, the October night was clear and cold, the mountains dark against the darker sky. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. A car drove past, its headlights sweeping across the bedroom wall. The world kept moving, indifferent to grief, indifferent to loss, indifferent to the small woman sitting alone in a too-big house, trying to understand why her husband had felt the need to warn her about the children they'd raised together. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think any of us did. The funeral was on Friday, 4 days after Howard died. We held it at Grace Methodist Church on the corner of Charlotte Street, the same church where we'd baptized all 3 of our children, where Howard and I had sat through countless Christmas services and Easter mornings, where Reverend Matthews had counseled us through the rough patches every marriage goes through. The sanctuary was full. More people than I expected, more than I could process. Hardware store customers, old friends, neighbors, people from Howard's Bowling League, the Tuesday morning breakfast group at the IHOP on Tunnel Road. I sat in the front pew between Rebecca and Martin, with Kyle on Rebecca's other side. They flanked me like bodyguards, attentive and somber in their black clothes. Rebecca wore a tailored dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. Martin had on the suit he wore to closings, conservative and proper. Kyle looked uncomfortable in his borrowed blazer, tugging at the collar every few minutes like it was strangling him. Reverend Matthews spoke about Howard's character, his dedication to family and community, his quiet faith that showed itself in actions rather than words. It was all true and all inadequate. How do you summarize a man's life in 20 minutes? How do you explain what it meant to wake up next to someone for 39 years, to build a life together, one ordinary day at a time, to lose them in an instant? People came up to me afterward, shaking my hand, hugging me, saying things that blurred together into white noise. He was a good man. He's at peace now. You're in our prayers. Adana, I smiled and nodded and thanked them, performing the role of dignified widow, while something inside me kept screaming that this was wrong, that Howard should be here, that I wasn't ready to do any of this without him. My children were perfect that day. Rebecca organized everything with military efficiency. The flowers, the program, the reception at the church hall afterward. Martin gave a eulogy that made people cry, talking about Howard teaching him how to use a level, how to treat customers with respect, how to be a man of integrity. Kyle stood at the entrance of the church hall, greeting people, looking vulnerable and sweet, in a way that made the older ladies pat his cheek and tell him how sorry they were. I watched them and thought about Howard's letter, still hidden in my nightstand drawer. Be careful with our children. They seemed so genuine. They seemed so devastated. Was Howard wrong? Had he been seeing things that weren't there? The reception lasted 3 hours. I shook more hands, accepted more casseroles, listened to more stories about Howard fixing someone's screen door or giving advice about the best paint for outdoor furniture. Rebecca stayed by my side most of the time, her hand on my elbow, steering me away when conversations went too long or got too emotional. It felt protective. It felt controlling. I couldn't tell which. By 6 o'clock, everyone had left except family. My children helped clean up the church hall, stacking chairs and throwing away paper plates, moving through the space with quiet efficiency. We drove back to the house in separate cars, a sad little convoy, and gathered in the living room, like we didn't know what to do with ourselves. "I need to get back to Charlotte tomorrow," Rebecca said, checking her phone for the 100th time that day. "David needs me home, and the kids have school on Monday. But I can come back next weekend if you need me, Mom." "I should probably head back too," Martin added, loosening his tie. "But I'm worried about leaving you alone. Maybe Kyle should stay for a bit. He can work remotely, right?" Kyle looked up from the couch, where he'd been sitting with his head in his hands. "I can stay, yeah. Of course I can stay. Mom shouldn't be alone right now." I wanted to tell them I'd be fine, that I'd lived in this house for almost 40 years and knew how to be alone in it. But the truth was, I was terrified of being alone, of facing the silence, of waking up to an empty bed and an empty life. So I nodded and said, "Just for a few days, maybe, until I get my bearings." Rebecca stood up, smoothing her dress. "We should talk about practical things. The store, the bills, the accounts. Dad had everything so organized, but we need to make sure you know where everything is, how to access things." "Tom's handling all that," I said. "He has copies of everything. Still, we should go through it together. Make sure nothing falls through the cracks." Rebecca's voice was reasonable, concerned, but there was something underneath it. Urgency, maybe, or impatience. "When are you meeting with Tom about the will?" "Next week, Thursday." "I'll come up for that," she said immediately. "We all should be there. It's important." Martin nodded. "Yeah, definitely. We need to know what Dad's plans were, how he wanted things handled." Kyle was quieter, but he was watching me with those sad puppy dog eyes he'd had since childhood, the ones that always made me want to protect him from everything. Whatever Dad decided, I'm sure it was fair. I'm sure he thought about all of us. The conversation shifted after that to safer topics. Memories of Howard, stories from the funeral, logistics about who was staying where and for how long. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that beneath the grief and the condolences, my children were circling something, waiting for something. That night, after Rebecca and Martin had left and Kyle had gone to bed on the couch, I went back upstairs and read Howard's letter again. Trust your instincts more than their words. My instincts were telling me something was off, but I couldn't name it, couldn't point to anything concrete. They were just being practical, making sure I was taken care of. That was reasonable. That was what good children did, wasn't it? The week passed in a strange fog. Kyle stayed with me, cooking meals I barely ate, doing laundry, making sure I got out of bed each morning. He was attentive and gentle, but there was something performative about it, like he was always aware of being watched, of being judged. He asked careful questions about the house, about the hardware store, About whether I'd thought about what comes next. What do you mean? I asked one morning over coffee. Just, are you going to keep running the store? Are you going to stay in this big house by yourself? It's a lot for one person, Mom. I haven't thought about it yet, Kyle. Your father's been dead less than a week. I know. I'm not trying to pressure you. I just want to make sure you're not overwhelmed. We're all here to help. You know that, right? I nodded, sipping my coffee, not trusting myself to speak. Because the truth was, I didn't know that. I didn't know anything anymore. Thursday arrived too quickly. Tom Pritchard came to the house at 2 o'clock, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing the same kind expression he'd worn at the funeral. Rebecca had driven up from Charlotte that morning, dressed in another expensive suit, her hair perfect, her makeup flawless. Martin arrived 20 minutes later, apologizing for being late, blaming traffic from Raleigh. Kyle was already there, of course, having spent the week playing the role of devoted son. We gathered in the living room, the same room where we'd celebrated so many happy occasions, where the light through the tall windows usually felt warm and inviting. Today it felt harsh, exposing. Tom settled into Howard's old recliner, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a stack of documents. First, let me say again how sorry I am for your loss. Howard was a good man and a good friend. What I'm about to read is his last will and testament, updated and notarized 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. Howard had updated the will 3 weeks before he died. Had he known something was wrong with his heart? Had he felt time running out? Tom cleared his throat and began to read. The legal language was dense and formal, but the meaning was clear enough. Howard had left everything. The house, the hardware store, the lake house in the mountains, the savings and retirement accounts, all of it, to me. Our children would inherit only after my death, at which point everything would be divided equally among them. There was a clause, written in Howard's handwriting and notarized, that Tom read slowly and carefully. This arrangement is made with sound mind and clear intention. I trust my wife Diane to manage our assets responsibly and to make decisions that benefit our family as a whole. I believe this arrangement is best for everyone involved and reflects my wishes regarding the distribution of my estate. The silence that followed was like something physical, pressing down on us, squeezing the air out of the room. I watched my children's faces, saw the subtle changes. Rebecca's jaw tightening, Martin's face flushing red, Kyle's tears drying up as if someone had turned off a faucet. It was Rebecca who spoke first, her voice tight and controlled. I don't understand. Why would Dad do this? We've always talked about the estate being divided equally among all of us. Tom looked at her steadily. Your father was very clear about his intentions. He wanted to ensure your mother was taken care of, that she had full control over the assets during her lifetime. But we're his children, Martin said, and there was anger in his voice now, barely contained. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't our inheritance count? You will inherit, Tom said calmly. After your mother passes. That's not uncommon in estate planning, especially when one spouse survives the other. Rebecca stood up, started pacing. This doesn't make sense. Dad wouldn't do this without a reason. He wouldn't cut us out like this. You're not cut out, I said quietly, finding my voice. You'll inherit everything eventually. This just means I have it first. She turned to look at me, and there was something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Cold calculation, barely masked resentment. Eventually. Right. So we just have to wait. Hope you live a long life, of course, but just wait. Rebecca, Kyle said, his voice strained. That's not fair. Mom deserves to have security. Dad was protecting her. From what? Martin asked, standing up too, his face now fully red. From us? Her own children? What the hell did Dad think we were going to do? Tom held up a hand. I understand this is emotional, but I need to make something very clear. This will is legally binding. Howard was of sound mind when he made these decisions. There are no grounds to contest it. I would advise all of you to accept it and move forward. Accept it? Rebecca's laugh was sharp, bitter. Just accept that our father didn't trust us enough to give us what we're entitled to. You're not entitled to anything yet, Tom said, and his voice had an edge now. Your father's estate is his to distribute as he sees fit. He chose to leave it to his wife. That's his right. Martin turned to me, and I saw something I'd never seen in my son's face before. Accusation. Did you know about this? Did you tell Dad to do this? What? No, of course not. Because this is convenient for you, isn't it? You get everything, and we get nothing. That's not true, I said, my voice rising. You get everything after I die. The will is clear. If there's anything left after you die, Rebecca said coldly, if you don't spend it all, or sell it, or give it away, or decide you like having all the power. I stared at her, feeling like I was looking at a stranger. Rebecca, what are you saying? I'm saying this isn't fair. I'm saying Dad obviously wasn't thinking clearly. He was 68, probably scared, probably worried about dying. People make bad decisions when they're scared. Your father made this decision weeks ago, Tom interjected. He was perfectly healthy at the time. He came to my office. We discussed his options thoroughly, and he made his choice deliberately. Weeks ago, Martin repeated, looking at me. What happened weeks ago? Did something happen between you and Dad? Did you have a fight? Did you say something to make him think? Stop, Kyle said suddenly, standing up. Just stop. This is insane. We just buried Dad, and you're all acting like vultures. We're acting like people who deserve what our father promised us. Rebecca shot back. We're acting like children who've been lied to. No one lied to you, I said, and I could hear the tremor in my voice, feel the tears starting to build. Your father made a decision. I didn't ask him to do this. I didn't even know he was going to do this. But you're happy about it, aren't you? Martin's voice was ugly now, accusatory. You're happy you get to keep everything. Keep us dependent, keep us under your thumb. Something broke open inside me then. Something that had been holding on too tight for too long. Trying to see the best in my children. Trying to believe they were better than this. I stood up, my legs shaking, and pulled Howard's letter from my cardigan pocket. I'd been carrying it with me for days, like a talisman, like proof that I wasn't crazy for doubting them. Your father knew, I said quietly. He knew you'd react this way. He tried to warn me. I held up the letter, and I saw their faces change. Rebecca's mask slipping for just a moment. Martin's anger flickering into something like fear. Kyle's performance of grief cracking to reveal something calculating underneath. What is that? Rebecca asked. A letter from Howard. He left it for me. He told me to be careful with you. He told me to trust my instincts more than your words. And right now, my instincts are telling me that he was right. The room went dead silent. Tom was watching us with something like pity on his face. My children were frozen, caught between lies and truth, between the roles they'd been playing and the people they actually were. Rebecca recovered first. She always recovered first. That's ridiculous. Dad was paranoid. He was probably having some kind of mental health crisis. People his age. Don't, I said, my voice harder than I'd ever heard it. Don't you dare diminish your father like that. He wasn't paranoid. He saw something. He saw this. Saw what? Kyle asked, and his voice had lost that sweet, vulnerable quality. Now he just sounded defensive. Saw his kids being upset that he cut them out of his will? Yeah, of course we're upset. Anyone would be upset. You're not upset, I said, and the clarity of it hit me like cold water. You're angry. You're angry because you were counting on this money. You were counting on your father dying and leaving you something, and now you realize you have to wait. You have to wait for me to die. Jesus Christ, Mom, Martin exploded. Don't be so dramatic. We're not sitting around hoping you die. We're just trying to understand why Dad would do something so obviously designed to pit us against each other." "He wasn't pitting us against each other," Tom said quietly. "He was protecting Diane. He told me himself. He wanted to make sure she was taken care of, that she didn't feel pressured to give away assets before she was ready, that she maintained control of her own life." "Pressured by whom?" Rebecca asked. But there was no real question in her voice. She knew. They all knew. "Get out," I said suddenly, surprising myself. "All of you, get out of my house." "Mom," Kyle started, reaching for me, trying to pull out the sweet sun routine one more time. "No." I stepped back, away from his touch. "I said get out. This is my house. Howard left it to me, and I'm asking you to leave." Rebecca's eyes went flat. "Fine, we'll leave. But this isn't over. We have rights. We have lawyers." "Then call them," I said. "Call your lawyers. Contest the will if you want. Tom already told you it's ironclad, but go ahead and try. Spend your money on legal fees. Waste your time fighting something your father wanted. Show me exactly who you are." Martin grabbed his coat, his face still red, his hands shaking with rage or grief, or some toxic combination of both. "You know what? Maybe Dad was right to cut us out. Maybe he saw what you really are. Selfish, manipulative, turning his death into some kind of power play. Or maybe," I said, my voice breaking now, tears finally spilling over, "maybe he saw what you are. Maybe he saw that you don't love me. You just love what I have. Maybe he saw that you've been waiting for him to die so you could cash in." Kyle made a sound like he'd been hit. "That's not fair. That's not true. Isn't it?" I looked at each of them. These strangers wearing my children's faces. When was the last time any of you visited just to visit? When was the last time you called without wanting something? When was the last time you acted like you gave a damn about your father or me as people, instead of as sources of money? The silence was damning. They had no answer because there was no answer. I'd been seeing it for years but refusing to believe it. The way their visits always came with requests. The way their phone calls always ended with financial needs. The way they'd slowly stopped asking about our lives and started asking about our plans, our assets, our intentions. Rebecca was the first to walk out, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. Martin followed, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the pictures on the wall. Kyle lingered, tears streaming down his face. Real tears this time, but not for the reasons I'd once thought. He was crying because he'd been caught, because the performance had failed, because he'd underestimated his father's ability to see through him. "Mom," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean... I don't want you to die. I don't. I thought we'd all share. I thought it would be fair." "Life isn't fair, Kyle," I said, exhausted beyond measure. "Your father knew that. He planned for it. Now you need to leave." He left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that somehow felt worse than Martin's slam. Tom and I stood in the sudden silence, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, dust motes floating in the air. I could hear a car start outside. Rebecca's Mercedes, probably. Then another. Then the sound of engines fading into the distance. "I'm sorry you had to see that," I said finally. Tom shook his head, gathering his papers. "Howard warned me this might happen. He didn't go into details, but he said there might be. Resistance. He wanted you to know that he'd made provisions for legal protection if you need it. If they try to contest the will, if they try to cause problems, I have resources available." "They're my children," I said, but the words felt hollow. Were they? Or were they just people who shared my DNA, who I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, who had turned into strangers somewhere along the way? "I know," Tom said gently. "That makes it harder, not easier. But Howard trusted you to make the right decisions. For yourself, not just for them. After he left, I walked through the house, this place that was suddenly completely mine. Howard's reading glasses still on the nightstand, his coffee cup in the kitchen sink, his tools in the shed, his life everywhere except where it mattered. Here, with me, in the present tense instead of the past. I picked up the phone and called the hardware store. Frank, Howard's assistant manager, answered on the second ring. "Frank, it's Diane. I need you to change the locks on the store tomorrow. And the house. I'm going to text you a list of people who should no longer have keys." "Mrs. Cartwright? Is everything okay?" "No," I said honestly. "But it will be." That night I slept in the guest room. I couldn't face our bedroom. Couldn't face the empty side of the bed. Couldn't face the drawer where Howard's letter was still hidden. Instead, I lay in the small spare room where my children used to sleep when they visited, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I'd lost and everything I'd learned. Howard had tried to warn me, "Be careful with our children." I thought he was being paranoid, overprotective, maybe a little crazy in those final weeks of his life. But he'd been seeing clearly while I'd been blind. He'd loved our children, I knew he had, but he'd also seen them for what they'd become. And he'd trusted me to be strong enough to survive that knowledge. The hardest part wasn't that my children had disappointed me. The hardest part was realizing they'd been disappointing me for years, and I'd been too invested in the fantasy of who I wanted them to be to see who they actually were. I thought about Rebecca's cold calculation, the way she'd gone from grief to anger the moment money was mentioned. I thought about Martin's rage, barely contained, directed at me for the crime of surviving his father. I thought about Kyle's performance, all those tears and hugs and sweet words that evaporated the moment he realized they weren't getting him what he wanted. When had they become these people? Or had they always been this way? And I just refused to see it. Outside, the October night was clear and cold. Somewhere in Asheville, my children were probably on their phones with lawyers, with each other, planning their next move. They would come back. I knew they would. They wouldn't give up this easily. Wouldn't accept that their father had outmaneuvered them from beyond the grave. But for tonight, in this quiet house that was finally, completely mine, I let myself feel the full weight of my grief. Not just for Howard, but for the children I thought I had, for the family I thought we were, for the woman I'd been who had believed that love was enough to make people good. Tomorrow I would have to figure out how to move forward. Tomorrow I would have to decide whether to fight or forgive, whether to stand my ground or try to build bridges with children who saw me as an obstacle instead of a mother. But tonight, I just cried for Howard, who'd tried to protect me, for myself, who'd have to learn to live without him, for the children we'd raised who'd become strangers, for the family we'd built that had been rotting from the inside, while I'd been too busy tending the surface to notice the decay beneath. The letter was still in my cardigan pocket, creased from being folded and unfolded so many times. I pulled it out one more time, read it in the darkness. Trust your instincts more than their words. I understood now. Finally, painfully, completely. I understood. And there was no going back from that understanding. The weeks after the confrontation were the loneliest of my life. Lonelier than the first days after Howard died. Lonelier than anything I'd experienced in 65 years. Because this wasn't just the absence of one person. It was the loss of 3. The unraveling of the family I had spent 4 decades building. The revelation that the foundation I had trusted had been cracked all along. My children didn't call. Not Rebecca with her efficient emails and scheduled check-ins. Not Martin with his booming voice and unsolicited advice. Not Kyle with his needy texts and requests for reassurance. The silence was absolute, deliberate, punishing. They'd moved from grief to anger to something worse. Calculated coldness, strategic withdrawal, the kind of quiet that felt like a weapon. I found out through Tom that they'd hired a lawyer, a firm out of Charlotte, expensive and aggressive. the kind that specialized in estate disputes. They were building a case to contest the will, claiming Howard had been under duress, that I'd exercised undue influence, that his decision to leave everything to me was evidence of diminished capacity or manipulation. It was absurd. It was hurtful. It was exactly what Howard had predicted. Tom was confident they had no case, but the process itself was exhausting. Depositions, document requests, invasive questions about my marriage, about Howard's health, about our finances. My children's lawyers painted me as a scheming woman who'd isolated their client's father, who'd poisoned his mind against his own children, who'd manipulated a vulnerable elderly man into rewriting his will. The characterization was so far from reality, it would have been laughable if it hadn't been so devastating. I spent November in a fog, going through the motions of living without really living. The hardware store kept running. Frank was competent and loyal, and the regular customers rallied around me in ways that surprised and humbled me. Mrs. Henderson from Haywood Street came in twice a week just to check on me, usually buying something small she didn't need, a pack of screws, a roll of duct tape, just to have an excuse to talk. The breakfast group from IHOP invited me to join them on Tuesdays, and though I declined at first, eventually I went, sitting in Howard's usual spot, listening to them tell stories about him that made me laugh and cry in equal measure. The garden club women circled their wagons around me too. Mary Beth Thornton showed up at my door one Saturday morning with coffee and determination, refusing to leave until I showered and got dressed and agreed to help her plant bulbs for spring. "Your children are idiots," she said bluntly, as we knelt in her flower beds, our hands dirty and cold. "Howard knew it, and now you know it. The question is what you're going to do about it." "I don't know," I admitted. "Fight them? Try to fix things? Pretend it never happened?" "You can't pretend. That ship sailed the minute they showed you who they really are." She sat back on her heels, wiping soil from her forehead and leaving a streak of mud. "But you can decide whether you're going to let them destroy you, or whether you're going to build something new. New from what? I'm 65 years old, Mary Beth. My husband is dead, and my children hate me. What exactly am I supposed to build?" "A life," she said simply. "Your own life. Not Howard's widow. Not Rebecca and Martin and Kyle's mother. Diane? Just Diane. Who is that woman? What does she want?" I didn't have an answer. I'd been someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's daughter for so long. I wasn't sure there was a just Diane underneath all those roles. But the question stayed with me, echoing in the empty rooms of my house, following me through sleepless nights and aimless days. Thanksgiving came and went without my children. I'd always hosted. A big production with turkey and 3 kinds of pie, and the good china Howard's mother had left us. This year I spent the day at Mary Beth's house with her grown son and his family, feeling like a charity case, but grateful not to be alone. Rebecca posted pictures on Facebook of her family's celebration in Charlotte. Martin's wife shared photos of their Thanksgiving in Raleigh. Kyle's restaurant apparently hosted a special dinner, and he posted about being thankful for chosen family in a way that felt pointed and petty. I deleted my Facebook account that night. Some bridges once burned don't need to be watched smoldering. December brought the deposition. I had to sit in a sterile conference room in downtown Asheville, while Rebecca and Martin's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s named Patricia Holbrook, asked me questions designed to make me look manipulative and controlling. Kyle wasn't part of the suit, I learned. He'd declined to join his siblings, though he hadn't exactly rushed to my defense either. His silence felt like its own kind of betrayal. "Mrs. Cartwright," Patricia said, her voice professionally neutral, "can you describe your relationship with your husband in the months before his death?" "We were happy," I said simply. "We'd been married 39 years. We loved each other." "Were there any disagreements, any tensions about money or family matters?" "Normal tensions, the kind any marriage has. Nothing unusual. Did you discuss his will with him? No. I didn't know he'd updated it until after he died. Did you suggest to him that your children were after his money? No. Did you encourage him to leave everything to you, instead of dividing it among your children? No. I didn't know that's what he'd done until the lawyer read the will. Patricia leaned forward slightly, her expression sympathetic in a way that felt dangerous. Mrs. Cartwright, my clients, your children, remember things differently. They remember you complaining about them, suggesting they only visited when they wanted something, implying they were ungrateful. I stopped, took a breath. Tom had coached me on this. Stay calm. Don't get defensive. Tell the truth, without emotion. I may have mentioned feeling like the children were busy with their own lives. That's not the same as calling them ungrateful or accusing them of being after money. But you did express concerns about their motivations. Their father expressed concerns. I defended them. That caught her off guard. She shuffled papers, regrouped. Your husband expressed concerns about your children. Yes, he thought they were. More interested in what we had than who we were. I didn't want to believe it. I made excuses for them. But he was right. That's convenient testimony now, isn't it? Now that your husband isn't here to confirm or deny it? Tom interrupted. Ms. Holbrook, my client has a letter from her husband expressing exactly these concerns. We'll be submitting it as evidence. Patricia's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing frustration underneath. The deposition continued for another 2 hours, but the energy had shifted. They didn't have a case. Even their lawyer knew it. They were going through the motions, possibly hoping I'd settle just to make them go away, possibly just punishing me for being the one who survived, the one who ended up with everything. When it was finally over, Tom walked me to my car. It was snowing lightly, the first snow of the season, turning downtown Asheville into something from a postcard. Tourists with shopping bags, twinkling lights in storefront windows, the smell of coffee, and wood smoke in the air. You did well in there, Tom said. You stayed calm, told the truth. That's all you need to do. They really hate me, I said, and I was surprised to find I wasn't crying. I'd run out of tears somewhere in November. Now there was just numbness, acceptance, a strange kind of peace. They're angry, Tom corrected. Angry that your husband saw through them. Angry that they can't manipulate you the way they'd planned. Angry that actions have consequences. But Diane, that's their problem, not yours. They're still my children. Are they? He asked it gently, not cruelly. Or are they just people who happen to be related to you by blood? Family is supposed to mean something. Love, loyalty, respect, what they're showing you right now. That's not family. That's entitlement. I drove home through the snow, watching the city give way to my neighborhood. The familiar streets and houses decorated for Christmas. Our house, my house, was dark. I hadn't put up decorations. Couldn't face it. Couldn't hang stockings for children who wouldn't come, couldn't set up the tree Howard and I had trimmed together for 39 years. Couldn't pretend this Christmas would be anything but a reminder of everything I'd lost. But when I pulled into the driveway, there was a package on the porch. Plain brown paper, my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. I brought it inside, made tea, sat at the kitchen table and opened it carefully. Inside was a photo album. Old, leather-bound, pages yellowed with age, and a note on top in Kyle's handwriting. Mom, I found this in the attic at the lake house last summer when Dad asked me to check for leaks. I meant to give it to you but forgot. I think you should have it. I think it might help. I'm not part of Rebecca and Martin's lawsuit. I want you to know that. I think what they're doing is wrong. But I also don't know how to fix what's broken between all of us. I don't know if it can be fixed. I'm sorry for my part in hurting you. I'm sorry I let you down. I'm sorry I turned into someone Dad felt like he had to warn you about. I love you. I know you might not believe that anymore, but I do. Kyle. I opened the album with shaking hands. The first page was a photo of Howard and me on our wedding day. So young, so hopeful, standing outside the courthouse in our best clothes, grinning like idiots. Then pictures of our early years together, fixing up the house, opening the hardware store, Howard covered in paint, me pregnant with Rebecca. Pages and pages of memories I'd forgotten or hadn't thought about in years. There were photos of the children as babies, toddlers, school-aged kids, Rebecca's first day of kindergarten, her hair in pigtails, missing her front teeth, Martin learning to ride a bike, Howard running behind him, one hand on the seat, Kyle as a baby, sleeping on my chest, tiny and perfect and vulnerable. They'd been so small once, so dependent, so full of potential. When had they stopped being those children and become the people who'd stood in my living room, demanding their inheritance before their father was cold in the ground? I turned more pages. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, summer vacations at the lake house, Howard building sandcastles with Martin, Rebecca showing me a drawing she'd made, her face alight with pride, Kyle learning to fish, his tongue sticking out in concentration. Near the back of the album, I found photos I didn't remember being taken. Recent ones, from the last few years. Howard had apparently been documenting our life without me knowing. There was a picture of me in the garden, my hands dirty, holding a tomato like a trophy. A shot of the hardware store at sunset, the windows glowing warm. A photo of our bedroom, morning light streaming through the curtains, my side of the bed empty, his book and glasses on the nightstand. And on the very last page, tucked into the spine, another letter. This one longer, dated 2 months before Howard died. Diane, if you're reading this, Kyle gave you the album. I asked him to keep it until after I was gone, to give it to you when you needed it. I'm hoping that's not for many years, but if it is, I want you to remember something. Our life was good. We built something real together. A home, a business, a family. The fact that the children turned out to be disappointments doesn't erase the love we put into raising them. It doesn't invalidate the years of work, the sacrifices, the hope we invested in them. You're going to blame yourself. I know you. You're going to wonder what we did wrong, where we failed as parents. But Diane, we didn't fail. We gave them everything: stability, education, values, love. What they chose to do with those gifts, who they chose to become, that's on them, not us. I want you to live after I'm gone. Really live. Not just survive, not just go through the motions. You're only 65. You could have 20, 30 more years. Don't spend them mourning me or trying to fix children who don't want to be fixed. Go to the places we always talked about, visiting but never did. Take that trip to Ireland you've been dreaming about since college. Learn to paint like you always said you would. Hell, sell the hardware store if you want. Sell the house. Start completely over. You don't owe anyone anything. Not the kids, not me. Not the version of yourself you've been for the last 4 decades. I'm giving you permission to be selfish. I'm giving you permission to put yourself first. I'm giving you permission to let our children face the consequences of their choices without swooping in to save them. Most importantly, I'm giving you permission to be happy, to find joy again, to build a new life that's yours alone. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Diane Cartwright, you made my life worth living. Now I'm asking you to do the same thing for yourself. I love you. I have always loved you. I will always love you. Take care of yourself, and don't let the bastards grind you down. Not even when the bastards are our own children. Yours forever, Howard. I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed. But these weren't the desperate tears of those first terrible weeks. These were different. Cleaner, somehow. like something poisonous was finally working its way out. Howard had known, not just about the children, but about me. He'd known I would blame myself, would try to fix things that couldn't be fixed, would sacrifice my own happiness, trying to maintain a family that existed only in my imagination. And he'd tried to give me permission to let go, to move forward, to choose myself for once. I read the letter 3 more times, then carefully placed it back in the album. Kyle's note caught my eye again. "I'm sorry for my part in hurting you. It wasn't enough. It didn't fix anything, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall that had gone up between us. Maybe not enough to rebuild what was broken, but enough to suggest that not everything was lost." Christmas came quietly. I spent Christmas Eve at the late service at Grace Methodist, sitting in a pew near the back, listening to carols I'd sung for 65 Christmases. Reverend Matthews nodded at me when I came in, and I saw understanding in his eyes, grief, loss, but also something else: survival, resilience, the possibility of hope. On Christmas morning, I woke up alone in the house, and instead of feeling devastated, I felt curious. What did I want to do today? Not what was I supposed to do, not what would make other people happy, but what did I actually want? I wanted to go to the lake house, so I did. I threw some clothes in a bag, stopped at the Ingalls for supplies, and drove up into the mountains. The lake house was 2 hours north, tucked into the hills near Hot Springs, a simple 2-bedroom cabin Howard and I had bought 20 years ago as a family retreat. The kids had loved it once. Summers spent swimming and fishing and sitting on the dock watching sunsets. But they'd stopped coming years ago, too busy with their own lives, and Howard and I had reclaimed it as our private sanctuary. The cabin was cold when I arrived, snow piled on the porch, the lake frozen at the edges. I turned on the heat, started a fire in the stone fireplace, made coffee, and stood at the window watching the water. It was peaceful here, quiet in a way that felt healing rather than lonely. I spent 3 days there, doing nothing and everything. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I took long walks in the woods, bundled in Howard's old coat that still smelled like him. I cooked elaborate meals just for myself and ate them slowly, savoring every bite. I sat on the couch in front of the fire and finally let myself feel the full weight of my grief and my anger and my disappointment without apologizing for any of it. On the 3rd day, I called Kyle. He answered on the 2nd ring, his voice cautious. "Mom, thank you for the album," I said, "and for the letter." I needed both. "I'm glad." A pause. "How are you?" Honest answer? I don't know. Some days I'm okay. Some days I'm not. But I'm figuring it out. "The lawsuit is going nowhere," I interrupted. "Tom says Rebecca and Martin don't have a case. They're just angry and lashing out." "They're being assholes," Kyle said bluntly. I told them that. They don't care. "What about you, Kyle? Where are you in all this?" Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm trying to be better, Mom. I'm trying to be the person Dad thought I could be, instead of the person I've been. I don't know if I can do it, but I want to try. That's all I can ask," I said, and I meant it. We talked for another 20 minutes, carefully, honestly, without the performance and manipulation that had characterized so much of our relationship. It wasn't a miracle. It didn't fix everything, but it was real in a way our interactions hadn't been for years. When we hung up, I sat on the porch of the lake house despite the cold, wrapped in a blanket watching the winter light fade over the water. In the spring, I decided I would come back here and plant a garden. Not vegetables this time. Flowers. Wildflowers that would bloom all summer, that would attract butterflies and hummingbirds, that would be beautiful for beauty's sake and nothing else. In the spring, I would also talk to a travel agent about that trip to Ireland Howard had mentioned. I would go alone or find a friend to come with me. Mary Beth, maybe, who'd been widowed 3 years ago and understood what it meant to rebuild a life from scratch. In the spring, I would decide what to do about the hardware store. Keep it, sell it, give it to Frank. Whatever felt right for me. Not for Howard's legacy or the children's inheritance or anyone's expectations. In the spring, I would figure out who Diane Cartwright was when she wasn't being someone's wife or someone's mother. I would discover what she wanted, what made her happy, what gave her life meaning, beyond the roles she'd been playing for so long. But for now, in the dead of winter, I just sat and breathed and let myself exist without purpose, without obligation, without the crushing weight of trying to hold together a family that had been falling apart for longer than I'd admitted. I thought about Howard's warning, that letter that had felt like a betrayal at first, a loss of faith in our children. Now I understood it differently. It wasn't that he'd stopped loving them. He'd loved them until his last breath. But he'd loved me more. He'd loved me enough to tell me the truth, to protect me, even after he was gone, to give me permission to save myself instead of drowning, trying to save them. That was the greatest gift anyone had ever given me. Not the house or the money or the material things, but the permission to prioritize my own well-being over my children's demands. The freedom to acknowledge that sometimes love isn't enough, that sometimes people who share your blood can still be strangers, that sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the lake, the winter sky, the bare trees stark against the gray. I posted it to Facebook. No, I'd deleted that. Instagram then. I'd barely used it, but now seemed like a good time to start. I captioned it simply, "New Chapter." Within minutes, Mary Beth had liked it and commented, "Proud of you." Within an hour, Kyle had sent me a text. "Beautiful. Take care of yourself, Mom. You deserve it." Rebecca and Martin would probably never see it. And that was okay. That was more than okay. They'd made their choices. I was making mine. As the sun set completely, turning the lake into a mirror of fire and shadow, I thought about the letter in my pocket, Howard's words giving me permission to live. I thought about the children we'd raised who'd become people I didn't recognize. I thought about the woman I'd been and the woman I was becoming. And for the first time since Howard died, I felt something other than grief or anger or confusion. I felt possibility. I felt strength. I felt like maybe, just maybe, the next chapter of my life could be about more than loss. Maybe it could be about discovery, about growth, about learning that endings can also be beginnings if you're brave enough to let them be. I went inside, added wood to the fire, poured myself a glass of the wine Kyle had sent months ago, back when I'd still believed his gifts came from love rather than strategy. It was good wine, expensive. I let myself enjoy it without guilt, without overthinking, without worrying about what it meant or what he'd wanted from it. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the world in white. Inside, I was warm and safe and alone in the best possible way. Tomorrow I would drive back to Asheville. I would face the lawsuit, the holidays without my children, the empty house, and the uncertain future. But tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be. I raised my glass to the fire, to the falling snow, to the memory of a man who'd loved me enough to tell me the truth, even when it hurt. "Thank you, Howard," I whispered, "for everything, for the life we built, for the warning you gave me, for the permission to let go. I'm going to be okay. It's going to take time and it's going to be hard, but I'm going to be okay." The fire crackled in response, warm and bright and alive. And somewhere in the mountains of North Carolina, in a cabin by a frozen lake, a 65-year-old widow who'd just lost everything learned that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself. I slept that night without nightmares, without grief pulling me under, without the weight of trying to fix things I couldn't fix. I slept deeply and dreamlessly, and when I woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through the windows and fresh snow blanketing the world, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. I felt ready to fight for what was mine, ready to let go of what wasn't, ready to build a life that honored Howard's memory, not by clinging to the past, but by embracing the future he'd wanted me to have, ready to be Diane Cartwright, not the widow, not the mother, not the victim, just Diane, whoever she turned out to be. And that, I thought, as I made coffee and watched the sunrise over the lake, that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The day my husband died, he left me a letter saying I should be careful with our children. I didn't understand why, but on the day of the inheritance distribution, I realized he was right.